If any of you haven't used it, I'd recommend you to get the Service New South Wales app, and the ability on that app to be able to just input your details from Service New South Wales straight into the check-ins. It is the quickest, simplest way to check in. I wish more businesses would use it. Every business I meet with, I recommend who's in hospitality or that or has a check-in process to use that app, because it is just so simple, and it makes it so simple for customers coming in. I know a lot of businesses like to be able to capture the data themselves as well and get people onto a newsletter. And
yeah.
I went to somewhere the other day and I think their thing was, do you like gin and tonics? Click yes if you do, and you go on our mailing list. And it's like, it's not another mailing list, please. But it is just an innovation, and to hear the Victorians the other day saying, oh well, New South Wales uses pen and paper. Well, there might be some that use pen and paper, but we are trying to move forward as much as possible with QR code check-ins, and ensuring that businesses offer QR code check-ins, because they are just so simple. They're simple for New South Wales Health and Contact Tracers to go through and actually have the details of somebody in a digital format, rather than going through and clawing through, you know, ineligible handwriting and seeing Mickey Mouse or something. So it is just so vital for us in our contact tracing. And of course, we see, you know, sort of return to school camps, music, and increased numbers for community sport. So again, we're sort of bubbling on about 200 cases a month. And remember, this includes overseas quarantine as well. So in New South Wales, we're at a position where, as I said before, 3,500 people are returning here every week into New South Wales, more than any other state. Because of the second waves that are occurring throughout particularly Europe and the US, we're seeing a much higher rate of people coming back in overseas quarantine who are in need of health hospitals. Because we've got, you might not appreciate, when it comes to our quarantine facilities, we've actually got two types. So there's the health quarantine, so effectively run by the Sydney Local Health District, which run as hospitals, high needs. They have what is virtual RPA, effectively checking in on them. People are transmitted across to the COVID ward at Royal Prince Alfred Hospital if they are significantly unwell and in need of attention. And then we've got our, you know, which probably, I'm surprised actually that this isn't one, but the quarantine hotel facilities, which half the hotels in this city are quarantine hotel facilities at the moment. Even if you walk across the Hilton, that's a quarantine hotel facility. It's a bit of a lucky dip when it comes to which hotel you might be put in. You don't get to choose. You might end up at the Hilton, you might end up at the Four Seasons, you might have wonderful harbour views, or you could end up at, let's say, a less fashionable establishment. So there's varying reports of quarantine. I know a few people who've been in quarantine, and some who've talked about, oh, I can't believe how fantastic quarantine was. My suite at the Hilton was fantastic. And others who might be at a place on Parramatta Road and may not find it as enjoyable. But definitely by October, September, our view has gone to how do we ease restrictions. This month it's all been about how we ease restrictions. So one of my roles originally was to, in the COVID Parliamentary Secretary role, was to consult with business, and I've conducted more than 100 consultations with business across the country. And it's been very much on the basis of, you know, tell us your experience in other jurisdictions and how we can do things better. Throughout that process, we constantly, and not to blow our own trumpet, but that other governments, particularly Victoria, have not been engaging with business about the restrictions that have been in place, and how to move forward and how the restrictions actually impact them. But it was very much, everyone wanted to talk to me at the time about, if you are to go into lockdown, this is what we want. We don't want this. If you don't do what Victoria did, where it was 1/3 of people on site. They were all the original conversations that people would be having with me. As we've gone through those conversations, it's amazing how that's dropped away to, well, the restrictions you've got in place, we want to see eased here in New South Wales. So literally within weeks, and it's even in Victoria where it's been significant restraint in place, where people have seen, okay, New South Wales isn't going to go down that path. We want to pivot and look at how we can get back into business in New South Wales and how we can move forward. And the government's been very focused on that, in being able to ease restrictions. Of course, one of our big concerns in the state at the moment is Sydney, where you are right now. This is our biggest problem. So on the spend data, and this comes from one of the big banks, in regional communities, we're seeing spend figures of about 110%. If you're within the pre-COVID levels. So if you're in the bush, they're doing better than they did before COVID. Now there's a few factors there. Drought, which is now effectively over in New South Wales. We don't have the drought impact that we did last year. Bushfires, which there aren't any active bushfires in New South Wales at the moment. And of course the fact that nobody can go anywhere else except from New South Wales pretty much. And so people are going throughout the state and travelling, and we're seeing pretty much anywhere within 4 hours of Sydney is doing incredibly well. And good luck getting a night in Mudgee or Orange or down the south coast or up on the central coast. It's very, very popular. So our regions are doing really well at the moment. When it comes to the suburbs, they're about 95% of what they were pre-COVID. So we're seeing a bit of a dip. When we come to the CBD, we're looking at 50% of pre-COVID levels. There's no international visitors coming to the city. There's barely any interstate visitors coming into the city. So if you're running a hotel in the city, except for people, and to be frank, people from the regions don't really want to come to the city either, because they see the city as being where the virus is, so they want to stay away. So literally, the hotels in Sydney are largely populated by people who live in Sydney who want to go into the city for a weekend. So this is a big concern for us. So we, on the 4th of October, announced that we wanted to get see the public service return. We also had a Sydney Business Summit that the Treasurer, the Planning Minister, put on. I was involved along with Ministers Dominello and Minister Tudorhope as well. And I should say the City of Sydney too. So out of that came a $50 million activation program for the city. And that's to try and increase things like outdoor dining. So recently, the outdoor dining approval program has been radically transformed for the Rocks, which is effectively Sydney, state government control. The rest of the City of Sydney will be moving down that path, hopefully, well, I think the timetable is before December, to allow for free, easy approvals on outdoor dining as well, so we can sort of have more activation in the city. We've also changed the rules when it comes to outdoor dining for 2 square metres rather than 4, to allow for more people in outdoor venues and to be able to get sort of some of those capacity constraints down. And we're also looking at what we can do in terms of getting people back into town. So an event like this is fantastic. So congratulations to Erica for putting this on. This is all part of it as well. So I encourage you to go and get dinner after you finish here, or grab a coffee at least, or anything. But we're looking at other things that we can do as well. So like cultural activities, having cultural activities out in the streets in a COVID-safe way. And I was meeting with the Sydney Theatre Company yesterday to talk about some of that as well. Getting on performances. So we've got the Great Southern Nights program, 1,000 COVID-safe performances, again to get, there's been very few, the most hard-hit industries of course have been tourism, hospitality, hotels, and of course the entertainment industry, which is just not able to perform at the moment, largely. But funnily enough, actually better than in most places in the world. So meeting the Sydney Theatre Company yesterday, they told me that they're actually the largest performing company in the world that's actually able to operate at the moment. Broadway's shut, the West End's shut. So we are looking at a very difficult environment for them at the moment. So 1,000 COVID-safe gigs on their way. But we're looking at what we can do to keep cultural institutions up late as well, get people back into town, and be able to see how we can reactivate some areas. Rooftop dining coming into the summer as well, trying to make Sydney a viable destination and somewhere people want to come back to as well. And big events coming as well, like the rugby's on tonight, the Bledisloe Cup. We've secured a host of cricket fixtures for this summer because Queensland had too many restrictions in place, so we're able to steal those events. So we are really looking at what we can do to supercharge Sydney at the moment, knowing that we've got these huge constraints, that we can't have international visitors, that we're a huge part of our market, and we can't even have people from interstate. We'd love to have them, but they have to quarantine for 14 days when they go back home. And the only border we have in place is Victoria, and as the Premier said the other day, we're watching one infection cycle to see how Victoria goes, and we'll make a determination on that. So that's about 14 days from the easing of restrictions in Victoria. So we're back to 30 people outdoors allowed as a gathering, 30 people per group booking moving up to Christmas, 300 people for events, and places of worship, importantly as well, going back up to the 300 with a 4 square metre rule as well. And we got to the point where we've got 3 million COVID-19 tests that have been conducted. And I might just show you how that sort of, I'm not working yet. I should have done that. So this is how our 3 million compares when it comes to COVID tests. This isn't on a per capita basis, this is on total tests. So that's more tests than Argentina, maybe not seen as one of the world's leading COVID countries, but it's more tests than Japan, and it's more tests than South Korea, both who have significantly larger populations than us. So Japan about 6 times larger than us, South Korea about 2 times larger than, well, in terms of New South Wales, Japan is about 20 times larger than what New South Wales is. South Korea, in terms of New South Wales, is about 6 or 7 times larger than us. And both are seen as leaders in terms of COVID as well, and being able to keep on top of COVID. I looked at Taiwan as well. Taiwan's about 1 million or so, but you don't have the same need to be able to have testing that with 200 days of 0 cases. So just to give a bit of a snapshot of sort of where we've been. So this is the epidemiological curve in New South Wales. So you even see sort of where that second wave began. It sort of bubbled along. We've never really had the crescendo of the wave. This is sort of the cases and by source of infection in New South Wales. So largely the local known. Overseas our manage. Here's our test count. So you can sort of see that step of 8,000, sort of 12,000. We've got some huge days in there where we're getting like 30,000 cases. I think one day is up at 50,000 that we had. We're sort of settling back. We're not happy with this. We want to see this sort of up there a bit more. But we've got through winter as well, so people aren't getting the sniffles, and we've got to be somewhat mindful of this. And this is sort of the log scale of what's happened. And as you can see, pretty much all Australian states have effectively achieved what is pretty similar, except for Victoria. And even New South Wales with a slight bump up there, it's largely sort of a flat line with a small indentation. And then compared to the world, okay, here's Taiwan here, the standout exemplar of the world, which has done so tremendously well. I think South Korea will pass us in their cases in the next couple of days, and South Korea sort of increasing the hundreds or so. So literally, New Zealand, and I often like to point out that New Zealand has achieved effectively what Queensland achieved, but with very strict restrictions compared to what Queensland had. So it's the same population as Queensland. Queensland's actually slightly bigger. Queensland's actually got less cases than New Zealand. So if you sort of take out Victoria, Australia's performance is significantly better. Through the test. Okay, so the economy, and this is, I guess, our main focus. Well, we've always had it as our main focus as well as health, and it's been the double impact as to the impacts of COVID, and they are global impacts when it comes to the economy. We're doing better than most countries. I haven't actually seen, and it's remiss of me, and I'm interested to learn more in terms of the Taiwanese economic indicators at the moment. Nobody believes the Chinese entirely, but I'm sure there is some rebound in terms of China. I've got no doubt about that. South Korea was also relatively minimally impacted in terms of the economic impacts, but the rest of the world has been decimated, and so Australia's performance is the best in the OECD. But it's quite shocking when you see sort of the UK at 12%. I know there's been a bounce back in the US recently, but that was off the largest fall in the US. So in April, May, we had 270,000 people who lost their jobs in New South Wales. These are New South Wales figures. We've been able to add 170,000, well, I shouldn't say we, your businesses, been able to add 170,000 people back into the workforce, and we want to make sure that we get back to the positions we were at. We had record low unemployment in New South Wales sort of going into this, so we started in a strong position. We've created over 500,000 jobs over the last 4 years, so we want to do that all again and more. Unemployment in New South Wales has risen to 7.2%. That's gone up a bit recently because more people are actually getting back into the workforce, participating and looking for jobs, which is good. 334,000 people still remain on JobKeeper in New South Wales. So we worry about that figure, and we worry about what happens at the end of JobKeeper and how many of those jobs are going to bounce back. And every day I have conversations with businesses where they tell me we need this restriction changed or that, because otherwise we're going to have people who we're going to have to let go. 35% of businesses receiving JobKeeper support in New South Wales, and a 4.8% decline in New South Wales wages overall. So that's where we're sort of starting from. So the next point is, what are we doing about it? And that's where our COVID recovery plan comes in. So this is our 6-point plan, moving New South Wales forward, trying to get us back, trying to get jobs created in the state. So the first part is in terms of infrastructure. New South Wales has led the nation in terms of infrastructure. We've got a larger infrastructure budget than Singapore or Hong Kong. New South Wales is a key market for infrastructure globally. A friend of mine used to work at a leading Japanese bank, and he said that they actually changed their calls from when they talked about the infrastructure pipeline in Australia to actually change it to the infrastructure pipeline in New South Wales and then the rest of Australia. And we want to make sure that's still the case and even more. So we've got $100 billion worth of infrastructure over 4 years that we've got planned. We've added $3 billion to accelerate that infrastructure delivery as well, to be able to create more jobs going forward. And I'm overseeing a lot of that in terms of how we work through that. And that's across the sectors of transport, health, education, and regional New South Wales as well. And that plan is to create 88,000 direct jobs. So some things in the pipeline, of course, as you see, cranes are in the sky. There's today even North Connects is opening, another motorway. We've got West Connects continuing on with the M5 to M4 link, second harbour crossing, and the Northern Beaches Tunnel moving forward there as well. We've got Metro continuing on with Metro West. We've got the Metro line continuing from Chatswood into the city and out to Sydenham. So we've got a lot of transport projects underway. We've got Parramatta Light Rail going ahead, and we've got lots of projects happening in the regions. So 40% of infrastructure in the regions as well. So hospitals are being built all over the state. We've had special acceleration in terms of health in particular. So 88,000 jobs is our target from this infrastructure program, and we want to meet. And the thing that worries me most is that you've all driven into the city or caught a train into the city. You've probably viewed the city skyline coming in. You've seen the cranes in the sky. There's a lot of projects going on in the city at the moment. So there's the new W Hotel, there's the Crown Hotel, there's the AMP building, there's what was the old Goldfields house, there's what is going to be the largest residential building just a couple of blocks away from here. They're all topping out at the moment, which is great. They're going to be lovely new buildings in the city, but there isn't much of a pipeline following that. And that's my concern. My concern is about what we're going to see drop off with the private sector as well, and how we get the private sector stimulated. So some of the things we've done there, we've introduced new rules around build to rent, for the tax concessions around build to rent, to be able to facilitate more build to rent initiatives into the market. Because we know that when it comes to build to rent, that is capital that's been sitting there looking for somewhere to go, effectively a safe harbour, that we wouldn't otherwise have without those settings. So we're trying to stimulate the market in places where we know that there is appetite and we know that there's capital, so that we can get the private sector investing. And part of that as well is moving forward with planning. So we've got planning and precincts as a large part of this as well, to be able to capture that private sector investment, to be able to make our planning system easier, and to be able to unlock some of that capital investment. So we know, for instance, that there's a lot of people who've been wanting to do things in New South Wales, but the settings haven't been right, things haven't been approved. So we're trying to fast track those projects. So 49 projects have already been fast tracked in their assessment. We've got more initiatives coming when it comes to planning, but really trying to take out some of those restraints that are in the market. We're looking at precincts, so you've seen some developments in the Piedmont precinct in particular. We've got 5 activation zones across the state, so from Moree with agriculture, parks with freight and logistics, and this very much goes on the inland rail, Wagga Wagga with renewable energy, Williamtown with defence and aerospace, and the Snowy Mountains as well when it comes to tourism and sport. But we've also got things around Sydney, so we've got the Westmead precinct, which is again an activation precinct for health and education. We've got Pyrmont, again sort of broadening the city of Sydney effectively, making it a key entertainment destination as well. So we've got the Star that's there that are looking at further developments. We've got Harborside, which is looking at a new development there as well. We've got the fish markets at Pyrmont, which is having a complete redevelopment happening there, so that when we do have international visitors again, we've got places for them to go. We've of course got just down, we've got the new tech city taking place at Central, so Atlassian as one of our anchor tenants there. And of course we've got the Western Sydney Airport and the Aerotropolis, which is going to be huge for New South Wales, and trying to co-locate our businesses to be able to take advantage of that in agriculture, advanced manufacturing, technology, to be the linchpin of that side. We've also got, when it comes to planning, we've also got a suite of programs in place with local government with e-planning to be able to try and get from the local government side to move further forward quickly as well, and to sort of join the government. And to actually help applicants in the process to be able to understand what they can do on sites. And even looking at things like if you wanted to set up a coffee shop, going into e-planning, it'll tell you where the next 5 closest coffee shops are to where you're looking at doing it, and might give you an idea that maybe you don't want to lease somewhere there, maybe you want to put an application in over here where there might be less demand. Education is key, so we've got $6.7 billion going into 190 new and upgraded schools, so again, creating physical infrastructure, that capital stimulus program. We've also got curriculum reviews when it comes to our school and our TAFE syllabuses. In TAFE we've added thousands of courses at discounted rates and fee-free during the pandemic as well, to be able to help people to skill and upskill into jobs. And there's going to be further initiatives coming out of the budget as well when it comes to education. International students, our international education, so Australia actually takes per capita more international students than anywhere else in the world. We are the second largest, we're literally competing with the UK at the moment in terms of international students globally. We are, New South Wales, very interested in continuing our international student market, and would be very happy to see Taiwan at the front of the pack there. And one of the things you might have picked up that the Prime Minister announced recently, and we've been doing a lot of work on, is in terms of specialist quarantine for students or for employment, to be able to get more people into the country. So we're working with universities at the moment as to how we can move forward with that, how we can get large numbers of students into country, because there's very few places in the world where you can do this at the moment, except the international students. So we see a big advantage for Australia. Sorry about that. A big advantage for Australia in being able to capture international students who may have been looking at other countries. And personally, I'm very interested in seeing us to diversify our markets that we draw students from as well. I think we've become too reliant on some markets, and so we need to look at diversity in where we draw students from. And some of the universities that have drawn from diverse markets are the ones that are best placed. The ones that have been too reliant on one market are the ones that are very, very vulnerable at the moment. So international students and education is going to be key to that plan as well. I mentioned before e-planning is one of our digitisation things, but New South Wales, and particularly under Minister Dominello, as the Minister for Customer Service, really sees ourselves leading the way when it comes to digital. We've got a $1.5 billion Restart New South Wales Digital Fund. We've got $240 million into cybersecurity investment and a new cybersecurity centre out in Bathurst. Cybersecurity is really one of our strong suits. Funnily enough, international companies a lot are looking at Australia as a safe place within the region on the Asian time zone to be able to headquarter their cybersecurity operations. So we've got a key advantage there in an English-speaking country, in a country that's a Five Eyes country as well. We also are seeing a big as you know, sort of the Australian and particularly Sydney and New South Wales global renown for fintech, and fintech being a big driver. And government is looking at how we can work with business in terms of our own digital needs, and working to digitise more things as a government, and be able to streamline our processes, but also be able to ensure that the investment is not just when it comes to capital, not just sort of bricks and mortar capital, but also in our digital capital as well. And we're very keen to work with corporations to be able to see that come to fruition. And I know of Taiwan's great renown in this area as well, and I see a lot of opportunities for us to work with Taiwan in this space. As Fiona mentioned before, of course the pandemic has turned our mind to our supply chains more than ever before. My wife works in pharmaceuticals, and she never ever had a conversation with anyone in supply chain before this. And when this all erupted in around March, spent every waking hour talking to people in supply chains about how to get pharmaceuticals into the country, because of all the global challenges. Now, our supply chains are a little bit more resilient than they were during March, but it has given us a big wake-up call as to the fragile nature of our supply chains and our international dependence. So we're very keen on focusing on local manufacturing, improving our supply chains, being able to look to diversify our supply chains. And one of the key things that has come out of this as well is that we've had 1,950 businesses that are registered to be part of being able to produce and make things for New South Wales, to provide support through the pandemic. So these are businesses that have come forward with support from the state government to be able to retool, whether that's to create PPE, hand sanitizer, ventilators, other needs that we've needed as a government into this area, so that we're comfortable with our stockpiles going forward. But we're looking at opportunities to be able to improve our supply chain. And the other area which I like to talk about, but not too many others do, is federal-state financial relations. And I notice that's changed to a 1, but it should be a 6. We had a federal-state financial relations report that looked at, that David Thodey chaired, had a lot of eminent people as part of it, including John Anderson, who's the former Deputy Prime Minister of Australia, Bill English, the former Prime Minister of New Zealand, Jane Halton, who's now on the COVID Commission and was the former Federal Secretary of Health, who are all working, as well as Professor Anne Toomey, who's a leading constitutional law expert, all looking at how we can make our federation more efficient in Australia, how we can have a more efficient tax system. So the federal government has not been as enthusiastic about these reforms as we might have been. The National Cabinet has been one very welcome reform, and it was one of our recommendations to continue with that in the report. But we may have further initiatives coming up in the state budget to improve what we can from a state perspective when it comes to national recognition and also our tax system. So the federal budget, the state budget, sorry, is coming up on November 17. There's going to be a lot more initiatives in there as well to keep our state moving further forward, supporting businesses, being able to kickstart our economy, looking at how we can how government can partner better with people to get the economy moving forward, to get more people into jobs, and to improve that pipeline. So just as a way of looking back at some of the initiatives we've had so far, so we've had grants for small businesses, and there's probably going to be some more initiatives to support business in that budget. We've got more engagement when it comes to small business support and webinars. We've got Business Connect advisors throughout government who are working with business at the moment through the Small Business Commission to be able to help businesses, to be able to look at what government support is available for them. This is largely a program which we took out of bushfire recovery and extrapolated for COVID and said, these Business Connect advisors were working saying, these are the grants you can get, this is how we can put you in touch with, might be banks or other creditors to be able to streamline processes. This is how you can look at partnering with companies. So these are some of the initiatives. We've of course, and this gets very mixed reactions depending on what side of the street you're on effectively, but the support that's been in place for both landlords and tenants when it comes to COVID and the impact. So we've continued that moratorium to the end of the year in terms of evictions, but we've also continued support in terms of land tax rebates. We've waived licence fees for tradespeople during this time as well. There was free preschool initiatives to support workers throughout the pandemic as well, which has been continued on. We've reduced payroll tax, so raising the threshold to $1 million. We've also deferred payroll tax payments for 6 months in New South Wales. We continue to relax the opening hours. So these are some of the big changes that we never really could get through before, but for a 24-hour economy, less restrictions. So even things like deliveries to supermarkets and that continuing 24 hours a day. We've received very few complaints about those deliveries, but we've heard a lot from business about how much that's changing their method of operation. To be frank, in the pandemic as well, how they can spread out their workforce and create less risk by being able to have deliveries 24 hours a day. As I said before, we've got some support for the creative and art industries, fast-tracking planning processes for approvals, the cleaning programs I talked about before, and of course the free TAFE courses that we've seen. So they're just part of the more than 40 initiatives we've had so far to date, and I can guarantee you there's more coming in the budget in a couple of weeks' time. So that's COVID from the New South Wales perspective. That's how we're moving forward. There's lots of opportunities. I'm really interested to hear from any of you about your businesses, your particular predicaments, and what you'd like to see from the government, and really very keen to hear about the Taiwanese experience as well and your insights there. So happy to open up for any questions you may have or input you might like. Thank you very much.